Okay, I think we can get started. Thank you for waking up early. I know that some of you may have had late night yesterday. I heard some stories about that, so appreciate you coming here. I hope you enjoyed the cheese last night. It was probably the most cheese I've had since last time I was in Switzerland. So until next time. My name is Lauri Timoni. I'm a senior product manager at Acquia, and I'm the product lead for the Experience Builder initiative. So the session is about Experience Builder, as you might know. I've been part of the Drupal community for 14, 15 years at this point. In the past, I've led some other initiatives like the Building Claro team, which is the admin team for Drupal core, amongst some other things. We have a lot of things to cover today. You can see there's a lot of different things in here. What I'm going to show in the presentation is I'm going to have some videos and I'm going to have some mock-ups. So something to note about the videos is the videos have been recorded with the Experience Builder as it exists today. So they're all working demos of what exists in there today. The mock-ups are showing something that we are planning to build in the future. I'm not talking about anything in the presentation that is like extremely future-facing. I'm talking about things that we are sort of thinking about in this first phase of building Experience Builder. So we next year or so. We're planning to have Experience Builder released later this year. So not everything necessarily that I talk about is in that scope, but majority of it is in that. So if you haven't heard about Experience Builder before, I hope that you have, but I'm going to give a brief explanation to what it is. Dries announced Drupal CMS, or Drupal Starshot, in Drupal Portland roughly a year ago. And sort of one sentence to quote him to what Drupal CMS is about is that it is Drupal's take on transforming Drupal to be the gold standard for no-code website building. Drupal used to be this gold standard for no-code, low-code website building in probably in the 2010s, around the time of Drupal 7, and we started focusing a lot more on the developer experience and more developer-facing tooling as part of Drupal 8. And now with Drupal CMS, we are shifting that focus again on bringing improvements to the user experience of building things with the UI itself. So how does Experience Builder map into the vision of Drupal CMS? So Drupal CMS has been broken down into three sort of major parts that we need to think about, which map roughly to the life cycle of building a website, getting it up and running somewhere. You would start with installing Drupal somewhere, getting some sort of starting point. Then after that, you would configure your site, you would import your brand, build your content types and all of that. And then finally, you would launch your site in some sort of hosting. Experience Builder is all about this middle phase of what does it actually take after you've installed Drupal to get you to actually get your brand and all the requirements built into Drupal, making it as easy and convenient and fast as possible. So because of that, there's sort of three main buckets that we are focused on in Experience Builder. We're focused on the use case of creating content and pages, which is usually done by an even less technical person than who's actually building the site, but content is a very important part of actually getting our site up. So it is an important item for us. Something that everyone might be aware of is that we are actually thinking broader than just the experience of building your pages and content. We're thinking about what is the experience of building your components, of building your site design within in here. So I hope that after this session, I've been able to sort of broaden that perspective to show that, okay, Experience Builder is not just about page building, it's about the whole experience of how you built a Drupal site. The fundamental foundation of Experience Builder is based on the idea of component-driven site building. So the idea is that essentially what is the lowest level consideration for building a site is a design system which consists of components. So you have a designer who built some designs for the site, and then you break that down into components that you can build into the context of web. If you think about that in the context of paragraphs, each individual paragraph might be a component. In Layout Builder, your layout plugins or blocks are essentially your components in there. However, historically, Drupal has been more centered around the data storage, where you would define like your content model inside those paragraphs and start with that. Whereas now with Experience Builder, we're kind of reversing that and we're going design first. How we built our design system before we even have our data model set up. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. Let's start by looking at some of these use cases that we have, what we can actually build with components. So the idea of this is that we have a component system. We should be able to use components for multiple different purposes that we might have in our site. It could be building pages, it could be building page templates, it could be building your content types, it could be building lists. The same component should be able to work for these different scenarios. So let's take a look at how that would look like for pages. Now we're getting into the first video that I have, which is an actual demo of what we have in Experience Builder. So in this demo, I'm going to start showing sort of the basic concept of how can you build a page, because it's the easiest way to demonstrate sort of what is the basic concept of how you would use Experience Builder. So we've installed Drupal. Let's hope that the video loads. Yes, we've installed Drupal. We click the Edit button on the top right corner, which launches Experience Builder. You can see on this left side our representation of the design system. So we see our components from the design system in there. We can grab components from there and drag them to the page. On the right side, we see form, and that's where we can edit the content for that specific component. Now that we are inside the Experience Builder, we can create new pages and we can navigate to other pages without having to leave Experience Builder at all. So it almost like takes over some of the administration navigation as well because of that, because now you can actually navigate inside here. In terms of the tools that we provide inside Experience Builder, we focused first on what are the tools that a marketer needs in order to succeed when they are building pages. So in terms of like, if you're a marketer, what they struggle with is that essentially they have to often create a lot of content and they don't have a lot of time to do that. So they need a lot of tools that can accelerate their the building of their pages and campaigns and all of that. There's also a challenge where there's a little bit of trade-off where sometimes they have to come up with creative ideas on how are they actually going to launch a campaign. Like let's say you have a Black Friday campaign coming in. It might be completely different from your other campaigns. So you have to have also that flexibility in terms of like being able to represent different kinds of campaigns in there. So that's where a concept of sections and components come in, where components are sort of the basic foundation, where you can have pretty granular components in there. But now with sections, you can provide your content creators some pre-built, like fully baked sections of the site to show that, okay, this is how you can actually construct these components together. And then the content creator will be able to deconstruct the section, will be able to build it on their own using those components. In terms of the experience that marketers expect is that they want to see everything visually. Like if you have a name of a component, it doesn't necessarily tell a whole lot what that component actually is. You need previews of everything. You need to see when you change something on the right sidebar, you need to see a preview of how that's going to look like. Let's say you have a padding, high, medium, low. Which one is going to look good? You don't want to be saving in order to see those changes in place because you want to just try which one looks good. And then you want to be able to undo and redo your changes because you want to be able to go back. If you did something that you don't like and you don't know how to get back, you want to be able to undo that. And once you figured out something that works, you also want to be able to reuse those things. So let's take a look at how sections work in Experience Builder. So we can see sections on the top bar of the library. When we hover over, just like on components, we can see a preview of how that section would look like when it's dragged on the page. Now we can see that this section consists of multiple components. So we are using the card, heading, and container to build this up for content creator. Then on the right sidebar, we are making changes to the text, and we can see that it updates almost in real time as we make those changes. This way we can build up pages really quickly when you have a well set up section library. We also have the layers panel, which can help you understand what is the structure of the sections that you've added to the page. We can also save sections ourselves, so your content creators, once they can build these sections themselves, and they can add them to the library themselves. So we are now adding the hero section to the library, and it is there. We can see the previews generated immediately in there, and we can now drag it to the page, and it shows up just like the hero that we saved in there. All right, I had to do quite a bit of changes to actually get my campaign fully built out. So oftentimes when you're building out a campaign or make some changes to your site, it's not about just one piece of content. It's actually about multiple things. Like let's say maybe you're a university and you have a 2026 application period starting. It's not just about that one landing page that you built for the 2026 applications. Maybe you have to change the homepage. Maybe you have to make changes to some of the other content as well to match that 2026 application period. So we're thinking about not only making changes to a web page, it's about how can you make changes to multiple pages. So I now built out my home page. I also went ahead and built out another page. We can see when we click the review changes panel on the top right corner, what are the different changes we have in this workspace that we're working in. So we can see that these are both something that is now, if I were to publish changes, that they would be published at once. Talking about previews, we also can exit the Experience Builder to see how the site would look like exactly when it is going to be published. Clicking the previews, I remove the Experience Builder UIs from here. We can also preview how this would look like on mobile. And now we're ready to publish. We can just hit the publish all changes, and both of the pages that we have changed get published at the same time. Okay, so let's jump back a little bit and go into how are we actually then creating all these components. This looks great. We have a great experience for creating content. But like I said, we have to make it really easy to build these components as well. In terms of how components are built in that Experience Builder, we have three main ways that we're looking into right now. We have single directory components, which you may have heard about already. You can use them, and if you build a single directory component, it can become an Experience Builder component just by defining the properties inside the component.yaml file. You can also have blocks show up in Experience Builder. So let's say maybe a list or form, not something that you want to build a single directory component. Maybe you want to use the Drupal form API to build that. So that's when you can now expose blocks as a component inside Experience Builder. And then what we don't actually have a support for yet, but are planning to add in future is layout builders, layout plugins, so that you can also have those show up as components inside Experience Builder. So from Experience Builder's perspective, these are all components, and they have very similar behavior to how they work. We do separate them. We do show there because there's sort of some unique aspects to each of them. Like let's say if you have a block, the reason we explain as blocks is because you usually cannot edit all of the contents of the block because there's a lot of dynamics to blocks. So we explain those as such. So that's why we are also differentiating inside the UI between the different types. Let's look at the single directory components, because of that is probably going to be the primary way that you're going to be building components for Experience Builder. So let's look at a button component. What does it actually consist of? So we have text inside the button. That is pretty important. But you probably have a link. So maybe this is more like a link because of usually that's in marketing context what these buttons actually do. They link to another page. But you might also have some style variation between your buttons. Like maybe you want this outline one or ghost button. All of that is completely reasonable to expect from a design system to have to support. So how do we build this up with single directory components and Experience Builder? Essentially, you would define all of those settings in your component.yaml file as individual properties. You specify their type. So, for example, the text becomes type string. URL is a type string, but actually we don't have the specification yet in this example to say that it's a URL. We would say, I think it's a type. There's a specific type. There's a second syntax in which you can specify a more specific type of a string. Same with the with the display. That's an enum. So it's a type string, but it's an enum. So it's very similar to that, where we would say with the URL. Now with this, you would then specify the markup that can take all of these properties to actually generate the markup that you need for this. And then that's all you need. Experience Builder just takes that and generates the form and all the data model that you need for that behind the scenes. So you don't have to go into Drupal UI, do anything. It's just you specify your component YAML file, we discover that, and it becomes an Experience Builder component out of the box. You don't have to choose your field widgets or anything. We generate all of that automatically based on the settings that you specified inside the component YAML. There might be in future some ways to customize that so that you can kind of optimize it further if you have if there are edge cases that needs to be covered. But right now we are selecting all of this automatically in there. So let's look at another example of how we could use these components. So we looked at the pages before. So pages are more like individual pages, but let's look at page templates. Page template next. So page template is essentially your header and footer of the site, which you want to be consistent across the whole site. So that's what you would do in the block layout today with Drupal. You can also manage now these header and footer regions, and to be frank, any regions that you might expose in Experience Builder, you can manage in there. But it is most common that your site nowadays would have a header and a footer at least. So let's take a look at how does that look like. So I'm now accessing the dynamic components. So these are blocks, and we can see here a primary navigation block. So that's the menu block that we have. I'm dragging that to the page, and now I'm saying, okay, actually, I want to move this to the header region. And now we can see that it's nothing really changes because I added it to the beginning of the page, so it's basically the same as the header. But now when you go to another page inside my site, we can see that the header, the navigation shows up on that other page. We can also see that in the layers. When we double click the header, it enters editing that specific region. And then you can actually use multiple components in there to build it. So you don't just have to use blocks in your global regions. You can use components and everything to build it up visually. So that's how we modify global regions in Experience Builder. Let's go to even a little bit more complex things. So content type template. So this is essentially when we want to have template content. So pages are essentially one-off pages, like your home page. Like you can't really define a structure for that because it is one-off. It's completely different from the rest of the site usually. This is your landing pages where it's about, what that page looks visually. It's not about trying to store something in a structured fashion. Whereas now structured content or CMS content, what we call nodes in Drupal, is essentially your reusable content, where you don't give a lot of flexibility to the content creator. You want to define some sort of template of what the content creator is supposed to be filling there. Let's imagine a product, for example. You probably need like a SKU, maybe image, title, product description. And you want those things to always exist there so that you can generate multiple different view modes or even maybe access it through an API. With pages, there's no such structure because it doesn't necessarily make sense. It's a visual first type of mode when you are in these pages. It doesn't mean that you can access pages through an API. It's that you can't necessarily build like a template that renders the pages. How you would read pages inside through an API is more like, these are all the components that are in here. I need to map these components to something that exists in this other application where I'm reading this data from. But you can't necessarily make sense of what is inside those components because it's completely unstructured. So it is layout or visual centered. So we built out this button component before, where we have these properties that we have. So how can we get content to here? So what we saw in demo of the pages was that we are using something that we call inline content.
This is where you have a content creator just dragging a component, and they are just specifying the content in place in context of that specific page, that inline content. There's now this other concept which then helps us build these templates, which is dynamic source. So dynamic source could be things like an entity system field. So you could say that, okay, I want to display the title of this node inside this button. It could be an external API as well in future. It could be, for example, just saying that, okay, build an API call and use this API key from this API endpoint and display it in here. So the idea is that this content can come from multiple different sources. So let's look at that a little bit more visually. How would that look like? So we are now in the screen where we are building a content type template. And we have now inside there the link button next to the title. Once we click the link, we can see fields that we can actually map into this component property. So for example, we have here the URL. We are able to now take a link from the field. So we can assume that in this case this would be a field. We could also expose other things in there, like we could, for example, say that maybe the canonical URL of the page should show up in there, and then you could dynamically map into that as well. So this way, you can build content type templates where, using those same components, you're now displaying content that is coming from a structured source. So now the benefit of having the link inside a field is that you can reuse that. You can build multiple templates for that. Like I'm building a card here, but maybe you need multiple different kinds of cards. Or maybe you need like a hero banner out of this. So you can use the same one-time specified link from that content type and generate multiple templates or view modes for that. It's very similar to how we built, like let's say if you use Layout Builder today, you can drag those field blocks inside there. The only difference is that in Layout Builder, you use field blocks. It's data-centric, where the template that gets loaded inside Team, it is centered around the field. It says a field --link. So now it's specific that the field data type, and it's like now you have to somehow map that field into a button component later. With Experience Builder, we moved that step, and we said, okay, now here you don't drag a field block to the template. You drag one of your components in here. And then you just specify, okay, I need to display this field in this property of a component. You can also edit content within Experience Builder. So this is how the experience that looks like. So this is what the content creator would see. They're creating and editing structured content. So we've optimized the experience for that, where you would have more like a 50-50 split on this screen. We show on the left what their content would actually look like, and then on the right side we have the form that actually builds up this page. So this is essentially then what we as developers and site builders, that what we take what is in this form and map it into that template. Right. Something you might be wondering, you might have heard that Experience Builder is being built with React. So you might be a little bit scared. What does it mean that we're building this with React? Does it mean that I can no longer extend Drupal at all because we are now building this with React? So let's take a look at what is extensibility with Experience Builder. So there is some truth that Experience Builder is taking a slightly different approach from Drupal historically, where you're not allowing necessarily you to modify every aspect of that UI. And that's a conscious decision that we're making, where we are setting some constraints to what can be customized in there. There's the reason for that is that we want to actually provide documentation that you can use with your content creators, that okay, this is actually how the tool works, and it should somewhat make sense regardless of how you've configured your site. And that way we can actually improve the experience for the content creators, because there's that consistency across different sites. But there's going to be some customizability, of course, because of the power of Drupal is all the flexibility that we provide. So what we're going to do is we're going to think about what are the most important use cases that people have in terms of how they want to customize the experience. And then we provide tools for those specific scenarios. The first concept which we have is that we allow modules to provide extensions inside an experience builder. And extensions show up inside this puzzle piece panel, which is called extensions. And we can see that we have some examples like AI, Notion, Unsplash, and so on as extensions in here. When you click one of these extensions, it opens up a modal, which is essentially floating on top of the page. It doesn't take over the page. You can interact both with the page and the modal at the same time. You can drag it around if you want to move it somewhere else. And the extension receives the full state of what is inside Experience Builder. So it can read that, okay, this is what the content is in here. These are the components that are in here. This is what is the component that has been selected, and so on, so that it knows actually what the person is doing in there, and it can react to that. So, for example, I have a fixed grammar functionality in this AI assistant extension, and how that, I actually don't have the screen here, looks like. How that could react is that, let's say, you have something selected inside the Experience Builder, it would be able to then say that, okay, let's fix grammar in this specific component instead of the whole page. You don't have anything selected. When you click to fix grammar, it can say that, okay, select the component we want to fix grammar, and then it can react in real time to what you're doing with the page. It can also change the state. So when you actually say that, okay, I want to change the grammar, it is able to write to the state and say that, okay, replace this text with this text in there. Or it can even actually select something, like you can navigate with the extension. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity in terms of what these extensions can actually do. Something that is worth mentioning is that the extensions, they have to be written in JavaScript and React, because we want them to have that smooth reactiveness with rest of the Experience Builder. We could allow building them in PHP, but then that would result in a very sort of clunky experience because they wouldn't react in real time to what is happening on the page. However, the right sidebar, where we have the form, that is actually generated by Form API. Now we can see again another example where this form is something that commonly needs to be changed to customize to some edge cases. Let's say you want to add some special functionality to support color fields, for example. You want to add a date picker in there. You would be able to do that via Form API because of this is actually being rendered with Form API. So this also means that many existing modules that are doing things with the form are able to work sort of without major modifications or without any modifications. Something to note is that here again, it's kind of similar story where we allow you to build things in React in here, and you can probably provide much better experience if you choose to do it in React. So we are encouraging people to write these to build these kinds of extensions with React. But in this scenario, there are actually valid use cases where you can use Form API without actually having to, it doesn't result in a poor user experience. Like, let's say you need to just change text or mark something as hidden. Like, all of those things, they don't necessarily need that JavaScript to be worthwhile. So what's actually interesting about this is that these are rendered Form API, and we take the form structure, and instead of rendering it with HTML, we are rendering it with JavaScript and React, using the Form API output that we have. So it is quite unique. It's different from how other forms are being rendered, but that is a way in which we can allow the Form API to continue working in here. Okay, probably the even bigger elephant in the room than extensibility is how can I actually get to this? Many of us have built sites with Power Graphs, Layout Builder, or other tools. So it is a good question. We've decided on two key principles on how we approach the migration aspect to this. So the first part is that we avoid forcing anyone to migrate into Experience Builder. If you're happy with Power Graphs or Layout or whatever you're using, that's fine. Continue using it. We are not forcing you to move over. It's up to you. However, the second key principle is that, because the first key principle might suggest that we don't want to provide migrations. So that's why we have the second key principle is, okay, we probably have a lot of people who want to move over, and we want to make Experience Builder so that people want to move over. So now, how do we then provide the people who want to move over a way to get in Experience Builder? The approach that we've kind of that you're arriving on is that we want to allow multiple solutions to coexist in a site. We've built a lot of big sites with these existing tools, so it can be kind of a big lift. We have to acknowledge that it's going to be some work to get these sites to this new tooling. That's why we have to be able to take an approach where you can have multiple tools existing there at the same time. So that, let's say, you start, for example, with allowing your content creators to build landing pages first. Yeah, fine. That's where you can actually get a lot of value from Experience Builder without having to move over all of your existing content to it. So we are taking an approach where we essentially allow you to enable Experience Builder on content type by content type basis, for example. So you can say this content type is Experience Builder, this is not. So that way you can do that gradual upgrading. So there's obviously going to be some work that needs to be up front in order to be able to do that, because you need, for example, have your components available inside Experience Builder for it to be worthwhile. But this allows you to at least avoid having to take everything at once inside the Experience Builder. Then the second part of this approach is that we want to integrate with existing assets that we've built. So that kind of goes into that where we need to have those components available in Experience Builder for it to be worthwhile for you to use it. So how can we use things like blocks, layouts, paragraphs inside there? And that's where this graph that I showed you earlier actually comes in, where we have the blocks in the middle. Blocks that you're already using, for example, with Layout Builder, you can use those in Experience Builder as well. So that way you don't have to actually rebuild your blocks into single directory components just because you want to use Experience Builder. You would get a better experience if you converted your blocks into single directory components, but maybe as a starting point, it is fine to just use your blocks as they exist today inside there. This already is supported with Experience Builder. We can already add blocks, as you saw in the demo. So this is something that we can already start testing out. It's okay, how do my Layout Builder blocks work with Experience Builder? And then finally, the probably hardest part of this, to be honest, is how do we actually then start moving our existing content that we've built to use Experience Builder? The big problem in this is that it's actually really hard to build a migration that is like 100% solid, where you take all of your content, you move it from one tool to another, and it all looks perfect from there. I would say that that's near to impossible to do. There's always some level of manual curation that needs to happen in order for these things to work. That's why we're thinking of taking an approach where we actually move the responsibility of migration over to the content creators themselves, allowing you to run allowing you to have old content using old tools within the content type, and then providing content creator the choice. Would they like to use the classic experience, or would they want to try moving it to Experience Builder? And now, sort of the light of undo, redo that we talked about before, we would then essentially allow them to try to move Experience Builder, and then if it doesn't look like as they hope, they can either tweak it manually, they can make those minor fixes, because it's easy to get to like 80, 90%. Like that's doable. That's easy in quotes. But getting to 100% is near impossible. So now, can we make that last 10 to 20% the responsibility of the content creator? Oftentimes you probably can. However, sometimes maybe things don't work out. Maybe there's a specific piece of content that is very complex and has some crazy workarounds in it. That's when the content creator could then say, okay, go back into the old experience. And they could then call, the agency and say, hey, I try to migrate this piece of content over. We need to make some changes to make that work. So that's how we are envisioning the migrations to work on a sort of high level. We are actually kicking off a sort of sub-initiative or sub-track of Experience Builder, primarily focused on the migration experience from the existing tools to Experience Builder. So we've identified a lead to that track, which is going to be announced later this spring. And we're currently looking into having agencies and other folks who are interested in helping with the migrations then work with them to make this reality. If you're interested in working on migrations or contributing to that, reach out to me and I connect you with folks that are working on this. So this is too much work for one agency to take on their own. So we can't, in order to make this actually happen, we need to get folks from different companies involved in this. The great thing is that I've talked to many customers who are using these existing tools. Many of them actually say they see a lot of value from moving their organization to Experience Builder. So for agencies, it is an opportunity to sell some of this to our customers and say that, hey, with this amount of investment, we could work on the migration and help you get moved over to this new experience that we have. All right. So the last section of the presentation is about the theme builder, which you may not have heard about before because of I've only talked about this in one presentation before this one. You may have seen this mission statement for Experience Builder. We've shared it in a couple of different places. You don't have to read all of it, but the key piece here is that in the mission statement, we're saying that we want people to be able to easily theme and build their entire website using only their browser. So what I talked about before doesn't necessarily explain how do we make all of that happen inside the browser. So let's see what we're thinking about next steps being for that. So now we are focused on the part building components in here. How is that going to look like? So I told you about 3 different types of components that we talked about before. Well, we have a 4th one now, which is JavaScript components, which is a new and exciting concept because I know that a lot of are experimenting with headless and building sites with JavaScript. So how can we now build sites inside Drupal and leverage JavaScript and do that only using your browser? All right. So let's take a look at how this Experience Builder code editor look like. So we are now, again, this is a video. So this is something that actually works. So if you download Experience Builder, you can try this out. So this is not just a pipe dream. This is not vaporware. It actually works. So you can try it out. So what I'm going to do here is I want to create a form next to this try Drupal CMS component. So I'm creating a new component called trial form. That opens up the code editor inside the Experience Builder. I created this form before because it would be too much time. It would take too much time to actually write all of this, but you can immediately see a live preview of that component on the right side sidebar. We can define properties in here. Those are the things that would then show up for the content creator inside the form. Once we are ready, we can add that component to the component library. It shows up now inside the component library. And I actually have to make some changes to this page because of actually want to have 2 columns in here. So I'm changing that to a 2-column layout. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just drag that component that we just created using JavaScript and adding it to the page. So that's how we can create JavaScript components inside browser. It all works when you go in here. And so this form obviously doesn't do anything right now. It is literally a static form. But you would be able to, using React, you would be able to connect that to API just like you would in a headless application. So a little bit of detail on how this all works. So the code editor uses React and Tailwind. That's a specific choice of tooling inside there. So that's what we are sort of converging on the recommended tooling for someone who doesn't necessarily want to set up a very complex design system and Git repository for that. We had to make some decisions around what that tooling is for this. You're not limited to this tooling, though. This is just what we provide inside the browser right now. There's also going to be a CLI tool, which allows you to build your design system using these JavaScript components inside a separate Git repository or inside the Drupal Git repository if you want to do so, and then use the CLI command to sync them to Experience Builder. And they are written in a very similar way to single directory components and what we see in here. They're just very standard React components or Vue components or Angular components, and then sync them in there, and you use the component YAML to specify what are the properties of that JavaScript component, and they show up in the UI, just like SDCs or these JavaScript component created using the code editor. So essentially, the tooling that you can use is it's not you can use literally every framework that exists in the world, but we are using Astro for rendering these components. So anything that you can place inside an Astro island, essentially you would be able to provide using the CLI tool in here. Which is, I would say that it is a reasonable set of JavaScript frameworks. We cover vast majority of the use case that folks have in there. Actually, there's also the paper project that Vue announced recently, which actually means now we could theoretically also add Vue.js support inside Experience Builder. And that's something that we are considering to add in future. So if you're interested in having a Vue.js support inside the code editor, let me know, and we can see if we can make that happen. Because of what happens with the React and Tailwind is that you saw live preview on there. All of that generated inside the browser for you. So we are using Wasm, the WebAssembly, to do all the compiling in there, and essentially any tooling that we do inside the browser then needs to be able to run in Wasm. And now with the Vue Vapor, we are able to then actually do that even with Vue.js. So Vue.js, Svelte, and React, Vue.js, and Svelte are frameworks that we can theoretically support inside the code editor itself right now. More and more tools are actually adding support for Wasm right now because it's not only Drupal that is experimenting, compiling JavaScript inside browser. There's a lot of other projects doing it as well. So it is a growing space in the market. So where are we today with all of this? So this is a lot of stuff going on, as you can see. We've been busy for the last year with this. Let's take a look how our timeline looks like at the moment. So we delivered an early preview 1 around DrupalCon Barcelona, which was essentially this UI or experience builder sort of showed that, okay, this is roughly what the experience would do. It didn't have a backend you couldn't save, and so on. We said, okay, wait until DrupalCon Atlanta, roughly, to get another early preview out. We are basically in this early preview 2 phase right now, where we are planning to have like bigger demo experience announced around DrupalCon Atlanta. And essentially with early preview 2, you can test out everything that I showed in those videos today. In terms of stable release, we are targeting a stable release still in Q3 2025. We did say earlier that it would be in July. I think it's now looking more like maybe a little bit later in Q3, but Q3 is still very much the target for having a stable release for Experience Builder out. And then after we have the stable release of Experience Builder, we are planning to kind of shift gears a little bit to focusing more on how does it actually look like to build Drupal sites visually. So we're now very focused on this code experience, which we believe is going to be extremely helpful for the existing community we have around Drupal, because we have a lot of developers in the community. And then next we focus on, okay, how can we actually take some of these tasks and allow a designer to take them on as well? And that way we can then grow our community and have more folks come in here as well. If you're wondering how you can help, providing feedback on the vision or what you've seen is probably the most valuable thing that you can do today. If this doesn't sound great from the perspective you have, share your concerns, let us know what you think. That's really valuable for us because we still have some time to make some course corrections on what we are doing. Obviously, the more time passes, it's harder and harder, but yeah, it is still valuable to get that feedback. Start building single directory component-based design systems. So that's the best way to prepare yourself to be ready. That's also a best way to show the world that, okay, we can actually build impressive design systems and websites using Experience Builder with Drupal in future. I know there's a lot of folks who are actually focused on this as well right now. And then we have a lot of issues in the Experience Builder queue where we can use help there. We're doing something different with the Experience Builder and Drupal CMS, where we also allow organizations to take like a sub-project of Experience Builder, where we sort of carve out a specific part of the project that they can own. And then I or someone else from the team meets with the team who takes that on a weekly or bi-weekly basis to make sure that they get all of the support that they need to succeed on what they are working on. So that way, we've been able to get to pretty productive collaboration with some organizations to get to progress Experience Builder. You can find the demo of Experience Builder on the Drupal project Experience Builder. So that's where you can download. It's a Drupal module. So we now have an actual alpha release in there, which you can install just like any other Drupal module. We are on Experience Builder channel on Drupal Slack. There's actually quite a bit of chatter in there. So if you're interested to stay up to date, join us there. And that's about the content that I had prepared for today. So I can still take some questions. I am going to answer some maybe frequently asked questions that I've received during the few days in here before we go into the questions from the audience. So I'll give you a few minutes to think about your questions for that. So one of the first questions that most commonly heard questions, given that we're in Switzerland, has been, how about multilingual? Can I translate my content using Experience Builder? And the answer to that is yes and no. Yes, of course, we have to support multilingual. However, it is not on our initial roadmap right now. What we have done is we've made sure that from sort of architectural perspective, we can support translations in here. And specifically, what we are aiming to support is both asymmetric and symmetric translations in there, so that you can sort of decide which approach is better. And that way, that's also key for us because of Layout Builder and Power sort of have slightly different approaches to translation, so we can get people from different solutions coming in for Experience Builder. That is not part of the 1.0 release, but it is something that we are planning to add as a fast follow for Experience Builder. That could be a topic for a subtrack for someone to own. That way we could potentially still make it as something that is available in 1.0. So if you're interested in that, that might be an interesting opportunity. Do we have any questions from the audience? I have some other frequently asked questions, but I do want to give folks in the audience also the chance to ask questions. We have one here.
Thank you very much. I was wondering, so the relationship between the JS and the PHP, so template. So when you write components, they're both in Twig, so they're not reactive. Then they go in the component builder, are they transformed, or so how the relationship works that way. And for the JavaScript components, what render at the end? Like, do we render HTML, or do we render like a React template that will be parsed later?
Yes, so we are essentially using Astro Island, and then we have inside those React components that we render in the client side right now. We can add a server-side rendering support for that in future. We don't have server-side rendering support for that right now, but we are keeping the JavaScript as React, so we're not trying to convert it into Twig or static HTML on the server. It is actual JavaScript. So if you have reactivity inside your components, you are able to. It continues to function. So I didn't have a demo of that in my demo, but for example, we had a submit for that form, and you built that general React in there, it would work.
So we are going like the island architect of Astro. I build JS just for the islands. The rest is
and we are able to mix the components that are built with Drupal and the JavaScript ones. So they like from a content creator's perspective, they all just like work. They don't see the difference. Which one are they using?
The questions? We still have some time. Okay. So I heard that
there's
two announcements. There's one question.
This looks amazing. Thank you very much for everything you worked on. So my question is about headless. So we do a lot of headless projects using Next.js. and we use all the nice new React features. How is the idea of Experience Builder to maybe support that in one way or another? Or is that not possible at all at this point?
So right now we are not targeting headless as the primary use case for Experience Builder. However, sort of from fundamental, like how Experience Builder has been architected, like we are able to add support for headless in there. Like we could swap out the rendering that we're doing right now in Drupal and change it to something that is using Next.js. And I guess the JavaScript components kind of already convinced us that, we are able to interact, the forum is able to interact with JavaScript in there already. So it is something we can add in future. It is just that we believe that there's actually a big part of the headless ecosystem that we can capture by just allowing you to build components in there. And you can use the tooling for JavaScript in there. You are able to use your own dependencies, for example, to build these components still. And that is the major part of why we, it's not so much about just using JavaScript. Like, that's great. That's, what people know, but a big part of that is also being able to use the tooling that exists in there. So that's why we have the CLI-based approach. There's also ways in which we are envisioning that you can actually bring in dependencies, even the in-browser code editor. We're using import maps there, so modules can add things to the import map in there. So it is something that we believe that there's we can capture a big part of the headless market, and that's why we're not focused on it right now. But we have in case it is something that actually becomes like the way the majority of things built, even with this, then maybe consider that maybe Next.js is the way that we should go about.
Thanks for the demo. It looks awesome. I have a question about testing it. Are you comparing it to proprietary vendors like Adobe and perhaps also testing it on users that are not in the Drupal ecosystem? Just to get a feeling with reality it's actually good for them?
Yes, so we're not comparing necessarily with Adobe. We are comparing some of those sort of more mid-market players, because that is the target market that we are envisioning for Drupal CMS. But we are doing comparisons with proprietary players, so we are benchmarking against them, definitely, because of the gap between the open source solutions and the proprietary players is pretty big right now in the market. So that's why we think that it is key that we do that. In terms of doing user testing, we are in sort of majority of the user testing that we've done is actually for just the general market, not specific inside the Drupal community. So we are using specific tools to recruit people outside of the Drupal community to be able to do that. We have done some testing in the Drupal community as well, because we are envisioning that the Drupal community is a big part of the market that we actually sell this in the beginning to. So it needs to make sense for the Drupal community as well. But I would say that it's more like 80% outside of Drupal community, and then 20% is inside Drupal community. Was there any other, I feel like you had a sort of multi-part question, so was there any additional questions that I didn't answer from that?
Well, there are some features in other systems that I like that perhaps I'm not seeing there, but it's true tested on our system. I'm happy that you're doing it. So.
Maybe we can have a conversation about that. And I think the feature set is also that we obviously have to start with something. You got to get something up to begin with, because we did set timeline as something that is a critical part of the project. So we are trying to, work with the scope and adding people, but you can only add so many people to the project. And so you kind of have to also work with the scope as well. We have more than 10 people. We have a team of, I would say, around 20 people if we count everyone in this, working on this full time. So it is a big lift that we are doing, even to get here.
So I'm holding the mic. Maybe another question. Will it be easy to import content from a separate HTML page? Because customers, we tend to do migration, but just this is a page from our previous site and I want to import that. Can we easily put this into?
We don't have that right now, but it is something that we're planning for in future. So essentially what it requires, there's a dependency on having generic sort of HTML elements inside there that we can use to
get the HTML back into. So essentially once we add those tools to build components initially, that's when we introduce these generic components or elements inside Experience Builder. And that's once we would also be able to add that copy and paste from outside HTML documents to Experience Builder. So, I think it's not very good for right now because of it is a big, feature for folks to have, but it's just in terms of how the dependencies go, we can't add that right now.
You talked about the user research being done. Is that information public somewhere? Like the results from that? Will it become public if it isn't?
We haven't been publishing the results of the UX research. Like there's a lot of challenges in doing that in terms of like privacy concerns that people have about. The challenge is that it is hard to recruit to these types of situation. People are not usually willing to get their information published. So we can publish sort of aggregate results of things that we do, but it's harder to give anything more specific than that. So we are planning to publish some of the findings that we have done on a high level outside. But I don't know how useful is it going to be to have, because it's a fairly high level summary of saying that, okay, these kinds of things, this many users acted this way and so on. Any additional questions?
So I've seen that, okay, we're transferring I think it's good transferring the ownership from the content creator. But what about the theme? Transferring the theme from the developer to the designer. It's like maybe that the designer who design the components and then he styles the whole things. Like, is that because how is the changing the workflow on theme in Drupal?
Yes, we are moving some of the responsibility of the teaming to a designer in future. And the idea is that you could have designers and front-end developers collaborating. Like it becomes a development platform where your designers and front-end developers can together in collaboration create something in there. And so that's a big pinpoint for designers today, where it's like, let's say there's like a padding that is not exactly how they want, or some other things like that they can come in there and potentially make the changes even themselves. So it's going to change the workflow, but we believe that it's not necessarily transforming the job that we do. It is just changing the way in which we do it. Like Figma already changed the way that we move a lot of the responsibility of the sort of markup decisions to a designer at that point. This is just sort of another step where you're moving some of that sort of more design-centric part of the front development to a designer, so that we as a front developers don't have to then be responsible for that.
That's it. I think before we thank you and you get a great round of applause, then we'll have an announcement.
So for the group photo, everyone goes down to the registration desk. We go through the building, outside, and then we meet each other at the main entrance. Just follow a few of the organizers, you will find it. And we have to move quick after this session. The group photo will be outside in 5 minutes. So please, after the session, directly go follow us. Thank you very much, Lauri.
Thank you.
Off we go.